It's being described as the cargo plane bomb plot, and it sparked a global security alert. Intelligence officials say they've intercepted 2 packages containing explosives bound for the US from Yemen. Officials say the plot has all the hallmarks of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So, has Yemen become the new front in the global fight against terror? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Darren Jordan. Intelligence officials say they've foiled a plot to bomb synagogues in Chicago. 2 packages containing explosives were intercepted in Dubai and Britain coming from Yemen. The packages were found on UPS and FedEx cargo planes, triggering security alerts in the US, UK and the Middle East. And as Hashim al-Bara now reports, there are growing concerns that al-Qaeda is using Yemen as a springboard to mount international terror attacks.
Yemeni authorities are in a race against the clock to identify the origin of packages bound for the US and how explosive devices slipped past airport security undetected. This is the man the US describes as the most dangerous al-Qaeda figure in Yemen. Anwar al-Awlaqi, a cleric who speaks fluent English, is widely seen as the spiritual leader of al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula. His teachings, posted on the web, were a major source of inspiration for several attacks, including the US Army Major Nidal Hassan, who killed 13 people at Fort Hood. Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, the Nigerian who was trained in Yemen and sent on a mission to blow a US-bound plane, used explosives hidden in his underwear. Times Square bomber Faisal Shahzad told investigators that he was influenced by Anwar al-Awlaqi. He is now on the CIA capture or kill list. Anwar al-Awlaqi is under the spotlight again. The Yemeni government tells Al Jazeera that the leadership of AQAP is hiding in caves in the mountains of Shabwa and Abyan provinces, and that they are cooperating with the US in the global fight against al-Qaeda. But so far, the core leadership of al-Qaeda in Yemen remains intact, in part due to Nasser al-Wuhayshi, a key figure who masterminded the merger of al-Qaeda offshoots in Yemen and Saudi Arabia. His deputy, Saeed al-Shihri, a Saudi national, he was jailed in Guantanamo. Qasim al-Rimi, a top military commander, was the man then tasked with building the military capabilities of al-Qaeda in Yemen. 10 years ago, a boat packed with explosives rammed into the side of Navy destroyer USS Cole. The suicide bombing took place here in the port of Aden. It was al-Qaeda's first attack in Yemen, and since then it has become much bigger and more organized. It is now considered the most active affiliate outside Afghanistan and Pakistan. This area was hit in the past by US missiles launched from the sea, but the strikes resulted in a high civilian death toll, which only helped stoke anti-American sentiment.
I wish the government would reconsider this propensity for excessive use of force. The victims are usually civilians. Al-Qaeda has a way of melting into the mountains.
But faced with so many other challenges elsewhere, security forces are stretched thin. That's why the government is working so hard to win tribal support in the war against al-Qaeda strongholds. Hashim al-Bara, Inside Story, Aden.
Well, joining us now to discuss this issue are our guests. In Sana'a, Hakim al-Masmari, publisher and editor of the Yemen Post newspaper. In London, Justin Crump, threat intelligence expert and CEO at Sibylline, an international risk assessment company. And in Cairo, Gregory Johnson, Yemen expert at Princeton University. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Hakim al-Masmari in Sana'a. Let me start with you, if I may. Officials are saying these packages bear all the hallmarks of al-Qaeda in Yemen. What more have you been hearing there about where these packages came from, briefly?
we're hearing the opposite of what the official Western media is saying. Until now, what we heard from local officials in Yemen is that these packages are not even from Yemen. This is what we heard earlier in the morning. Right now, we have a senior official telling us that 2 females were arrested just 30 minutes ago on suspicion of sending these 2 packages to the States. But these 2 females are on suspicion of sending them to cause chaos for the country and not on any links to al-Qaeda. This is according to a senior official that we talked to a while ago.
All right, Gregory Johnson in Cairo, President Obama has described the packages as, quote, a credible terrorist threat. What's your assessment of this plot originating in Yemen? How worried should we be about it?
I think the U.S. and other countries in Europe should be very worried. This is something that al-Qaeda has shown itself to be a group that isn't lacking in ambition. It's tried to carry out a number of attacks. There was the assassination attempt on Mohammed bin Naif, the Deputy Minister of the Interior in Saudi Arabia last year. They followed that up with an attempt on a U.S. airliner over Detroit on Christmas Day. And then this next attempt, sending packages to the U.S. This is an organization that's incredibly active and is looking to cause chaos wherever it can.
Justin Crump in London, how much of a coup is this, do you think, for the intelligence services? I mean, they must be quietly congratulating themselves.
Well, I mean, certainly I think there was an intelligence success here. The interception of the plane that landed at East Midlands Airport, cargo there wasn't additionally screened, and the information that led to that came, we believe, from allies in the region, as it's being termed, passed on through SIS here to actually tip people off that these packages were coming. I think that slightly plays against the line that there were a couple of people aiming to cause chaos. But again, it's very early days to sort of see the full story. I think that will come out over the next week or so. I have to agree with Gregory that this is a very serious threat, irrespective of this particular incident.
Hakim al-Masmari in Sana'a again. Yemeni security officials are now saying they're examining a further 24 suspect packages in Yemen as part of their investigations into this plot. Where did those packages come from?
The government is currently very worried that this case might become international, which it already is, and cause more problems to the country. So right now, Yemeni security forces just surrounded the FedEx office in Sana'a with around 40 different security personnel. The idea is to take all the packages and inspect them. FedEx is happening right now. These searches, DHL and UPS will happen in the next hour or so. But the government is very serious, and yes, it took 24 packages, but we heard 26. And now there are claims that at least 200 more packages are inside FedEx, which the government is taking right now at the moment.
So it could be a much wider plot. Gregory Johnson, this tip-off, as we know, came from Saudi Arabia. But how do you think US Homeland Security will be reacting? Will they be rattled by this, or were they much better prepared in terms of the intelligence sharing and gathering?
Well, the cooperation between the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Yemen, I think, is key when you're going after a group like al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And certainly over the past several months, we've seen the security agencies of those 3 countries work closer together than they have in the past. But still, I think, and it's rather unfortunate, this is a relationship between the 3 countries, the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Yemen, that's still characterized by a great deal of mistrust. So while we have this tip-off from Saudi Arabia that led, thankfully, to the discovery of these 2 packages, there's still a chance, and given al-Qaeda's ambition, that something could sneak through. It only takes one, and that can, unfortunately, cause a great deal of damage.
Justin Crump, the fact that a package containing explosives landed at a British airport does beg some very serious questions. I mean, was it screened, and why weren't the explosives picked up in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, cargo screening's always been lower priority. If this was indeed AQAP, as obviously seems very likely, it's an interesting shift from the attack by Omar Farouk Abdulmuttalib, in that it's no longer attacking passenger aircraft but cargo. And cargo has always been a weak link, but it's a less spectacular target. So you can actually read this slightly, though, as saying actually they've been driven to try a different method, because the line of development they tried against Prince Mohammed bin Naif and evolved into the attack on Northwest Airlines Flight 253. They've had to stop following that line, and in fact they've now tried a different vector, if you like, to launch an attack. So in a way it does show some of the successes we have been having against that threat, but it also shows the way they're going to adapt and keep finding ways to come and launch the attacks they want to launch against us.
Hakim al-Masmari in Sana'a, it appears that the intelligence tip-off, as we were saying there, came from the Saudis. How well developed is the Saudi intelligence network actually in Yemen? I mean, how does the connection actually work?
First of all, I don't believe the Saudis even had a tip-off here in Yemen about this story, and this is just a propaganda to help Saudi Arabia have a stronger influence inside Yemen. What we believe right now is that if these packages came from Yemen, the Yemeni forces until now are denying that even they were sent from Yemen, and this was also denied by the Emirates police commissioner, who also denied that any packages came from Yemen. But the idea here is that I'm not trying to say that al-Qaeda is weak in Yemen. Al-Qaeda is becoming stronger, and Yemen will need Saudi's intelligence help. But on this case in specific, Saudi Arabia, in my point of view, did nothing, because if it wanted to do something, it could have done something while they were in Yemen and not while after they were sent to the UK.
Justin Crump, an interesting viewpoint there from Hakim al-Masmari, saying that as far as he's concerned, there was very little Saudi input. But I mean, if the Saudis did give the intelligence tip-off, as many sources seem to think, how do you assess the Saudi intelligence connection? I mean, the Saudis clearly have a very effective network set up in Yemen, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, of course, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula came out of al-Qaeda in Yemen, and the very old-fashioned al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula that was actually in Saudi Arabia. And obviously, the purpose of being in Yemen is actually largely to launch attacks throughout the whole Arabian Peninsula, and very much focused on Saudi when you think of al-Qaeda's history. So that works two ways, of course, that actually any defections from that group, and there have been a few high-profile ones, that go back to Saudi, does give them a large amount of intelligence insight, because they're dealing with their own family, if you like. You know, these are Saudi militants for a large part, and so that's quite good access for them. That really helps Saudi get some visibility. And I think the cooperation between the sort of Saudi and Yemeni governments has been shown around other things like the Houthi conflict, especially towards the end of last year, when there were more or less coordinated military operations. So I think there is a degree of access and talk there, but I also agree that it's not always as functional as it probably should be. I don't think there's a brilliant connection between the two governments. And again, it's not entirely clear at this point where that information came from.
Okay.
And if I can pick up on a slightly earlier point on Gregory's, again, saying, getting lucky, there's pretty clear evidence that we knew that the attack was coming at the end of last year. And even with that foreknowledge, intelligence and everything else, Abdul-Muttalib got over Detroit and got to the stage where he was trying to detonate his device. So I think that really reinforces that point.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, stay with us, won't you? Because al-Qaeda in Yemen has been active for almost 20 years. The group gained new momentum last year after merging with the neighbouring Saudi offshoot of the network. Renamed al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or AQAP, the group is based in eastern Yemen and led by a former aide to Osama bin Laden. AQAP says their main goal is to topple the Saudi monarchy and the Yemeni government. The group also claimed responsibility for the foiled Christmas Day plot to blow up a Detroit-bound passenger plane. And the man accused of trying to blow up a car in New York's Times Square says he was inspired by a senior al-Qaeda figure now hiding in Yemen. And in a televised address, US President Barack Obama has said al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula represents a credible terrorist threat.
Although we are still pursuing all the facts, we do know that the packages originated in Yemen. We also know that al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, a terrorist group based in Yemen, continues to plan attacks against our homeland, our citizens, and our friends and allies. Going forward, we will continue to strengthen our cooperation with the Yemeni government to disrupt plotting by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and to destroy this al-Qaeda affiliate.
All right, let's go back to Hakim al-Masmari there in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a. Hakim al-Masmari, this isn't the first time that terror plots have originated in Yemen, but why Yemen? What's attracting al-Qaeda there?
First of all, the main thing that's attracting al-Qaeda in Yemen is the lack of security in every part of the country. Outside the main capitals or the main cities in Yemen, there is very low security. That is why al-Qaeda is considering Yemen as an option. The option that was also taken previously in Pakistan, in the rugged areas of Pakistan and the rugged areas of Afghanistan. But why now exactly? A year ago, I said that al-Qaeda was weak in Yemen. Now I'm changing my stance a little, not because of I felt I was wrong, but because right now the al-Qaeda, the Yemeni al-Qaeda fighters who were in Pakistan and Afghanistan are told by the al-Qaeda leaders to come back to Yemen and fight in Yemen because they have the official and the senior leadership that Yemen needs, that Yemen al-Qaeda members in Yemen need. Because the local al-Qaeda members here in Yemen are minor. They lack the influence. They lack the power to make strong operations and the experience. So that is why we believe in the next months or so, al-Qaeda in Yemen will become stronger. That is because more international fighters, Yemeni international fighters, coming back to Yemen, and the continuous lack of security of government in some rugged areas. The government is claiming that it is dealing with tribesmen to help give them extra security. But these tribesmen are only helping to a certain limit because the government's effect on those areas are very rare.
Justin Crump in London, it's an interesting point that Hakim al-Masmari makes there in Sana'a. But how much of a worry is Yemen becoming to the intelligence community, do you think? I mean, we've seen all these foiled terror plots originating from Yemen, but how worried, how concerned is the intelligence community over the country? Yes, certainly. For all the reasons we've discussed, it's a sort of long-term background in this, and obviously bin Laden's own connections there. The resurrection of the group there from Saudi, really has highlighted the danger over the last couple of years. And again, it's a great operational environment for them. It's a very confused environment to hide in. There's a great deal of popular support, which I have to say I think has been exacerbated by some of the military action there, particularly around sort of last Christmas time. And so, it's a great concern because also operating there is so difficult because the government's got so many difficulties to deal with. It's got so many factors to deal with. International pressure is to focus on al-Qaeda, whereas for the president, he's got many other things to worry about. And al-Qaeda is probably almost lowest on his domestic list of troubles. So, a very complex environment, very complex intelligence environment. And I think for al-Qaeda, very, very strategically important. And strategically important, I think, links slightly to prophecy, in fact, and Islamic prophecy, and certainly some of the things they look at, and that you saw quoted earlier this year, the story of the 12,000 that will come from Aden Abyan, that will be the best fighters for Islam. And we couple that with the fact that people are being moved back from Afghanistan, presumably under the direction to an extent of al-Qaeda Central, to focus on Yemen. It's a very powerful thing they can use, this story. So great concern to us. Gregory Johnson in Cairo, Justin Crump was saying there, a very complicated picture for the Yemeni government. They face considerable domestic security challenges. We have the southern secessionists, we have the Houthi rebellion in the north. I mean, how are those conflicts, do you think, playing into the hands of al-Qaeda?
I think al-Qaeda uses them to great rhetorical benefit. And one of the things I think that's really important to keep in mind when we're talking about al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is that this group and the groups that it sort of evolved out of, there's been an ebb and flow to this. So after September 11th, the U.S. had really destroyed this organization by the end of 2003. And then really the U.S. and the Yemeni governments took their eye off the ball. And they took their eye off the ball because of this Houthi rebellion that broke out in June of 2004. Then in 2007, there was increasingly violent calls for secession in the south. And so all of this sort of lack of attention by both the U.S. and Yemeni governments gave al-Qaeda a great deal of room in which to operate. So after the prison break in February of 2006, in which 23 al-Qaeda suspects tunneled out of a maximum security prison into a neighboring mosque where they said their morning prayers and then walked out the front door to freedom, after that event, al-Qaeda really had 2 or 3 years to build a durable infrastructure within Yemen. And so what we're seeing right now with the U.S. going after al-Qaeda figures is that al-Qaeda is able to withstand the loss of key cell leaders. They're just too strong right now for the sort of strategy that the U.S. implemented in the days after September 11th, whereby the U.S. would target particular leaders and hope that the organization would collapse around them. That just isn't the case now.
Hakim al-Masmari in Sana'a, what do you make of this issue that the Yemeni government has perhaps used the war against al-Qaeda as a chance to crack down on its political opponents, arresting many innocent people and thereby pushing young men to join the ranks of al-Qaeda?
With the government's policy right now, the attacking of villages, the imprisonment of hundreds of citizens, most of them are innocent, or 99% of them just suspects, this will only make al-Qaeda stronger. The government knows that it's forced by the West to fight al-Qaeda, but the government right now is trying to tell the West that the way you fought al-Qaeda in Pakistan and Afghanistan has failed. Al-Qaeda has only become stronger over the last couple of years because of the random attacks and the random imprisonment of suspected people in Afghanistan and Pakistan. That is why we see today that they are stronger stronger than ever, especially in those two countries. The Yemeni government does not want the same mistake that the U.S. And international forces did in Afghanistan to happen again in Yemen. That is why they're trying their utmost to do it in a very different way. But every time these attacks happen, or by the Yemeni government, or the random imprisonment of thousands or hundreds of people, this is because of international pressure on Yemen to show that it is fighting al-Qaeda, while Yemen, what I believe, thinks that it's the wrong way to fight al-Qaeda because of past experiences, and Afghanistan and Pakistan are just examples of how these random attacks have just failed and only made al-Qaeda stronger.
Justin Crump, we know the Americans are pumping millions of dollars into Yemen for counter-terrorist training, but is that going to be enough, do you think?
Again, I mean, the issue is, Yemen dancing on the heads of snakes, like is, governing the country for the president, and so many problems. And exactly as I was just saying, al-Qaeda is almost the lowest. So the money is going to go in there, but it will be diverted to other causes almost certainly. Of course, the way the government works and the structures are in Yemen, that'll affect the way the money gets used. Exactly the same problem you were saying before there. I mean, trying to intervene in the way you have in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, I mean, that's been very, very difficult, of course, and has led to so many consequences. And you just can't imagine that happening in Yemen. And I think, again, that was shown last December with the missile strikes that were carried out, largely affected civilians, I think partly because al-Qaeda were expecting them. And it just led to a huge surge in recruiting and indeed popular support in the provinces where they're now most operating. So, yeah, tremendous issues. When however much money you throw at it in a very, very complex situation that you have to fully understand before trying to influence any part of it, because it's such a sort of self-involved system with so many feedbacks, and that's the real critical thing for the West.
Gregory Johnson, I saw you nodding your head there. I mean, what is the way forward? As Justin Crump was saying there, it's a very complicated picture, lots of different parts to the equation. So what's the way forward here?
Well, I think for the U.S., it's, as Justin rightly pointed out, it's an incredibly difficult picture. And the way the U.S. has fought wars previously is not the way that they can fight this one in Yemen. They can't really invade because we know that would have catastrophic consequences for the country. This would be something that would be a recruiting field day for al-Qaeda. Instead of a group of, 800, 1,000, 1,500 individuals, you'd be fighting 10 times that number. And then also carrying out these airstrikes, as Justin rightly pointed out back in December, has also played into al-Qaeda hands. So how the U.S. goes about fighting a different type of war against a different type of enemy in an environment as inhospitable as Yemen is something that I just don't think the Obama administration has really grappled with. Okay. We're almost 11 months after the failed attack on Christmas Day, and I really haven't seen the type of attention that I would like to see from the Obama administration to have a serious intellectual wrestling with the diverse problems coming out of Yemen.
Okay, Hakim al-Masmari, a final brief thought from you in terms of the strategy for the way forward. Is this the proper way? Are the Americans taking the bull by the horns?
This is totally the wrong way. And as I said, to prove my case, look at Afghanistan and Pakistan. It only proved that al-Qaeda can only get stronger by these attacks. If attacks wanted to be made, these attacks should be accurate, but until now, 90% of those who die are civilians. 90% of those who are killed are civilians. 90% of those who are imprisoned by international forces on suspicion of being al-Qaeda are civilians and innocent people. If this is the right way to fight al-Qaeda, I believe this is the right way to make al-Qaeda stronger, and the only way to make al-Qaeda grow in Yemen the same way it grew in Pakistan and in Afghanistan. So if you want to fight al-Qaeda, you have two options: either to make your attacks accurate, and if you're going to suspect on people, make sure that your investigations are also accurate. Okay. Other than that, you should try on other formulas on how to help the country and not destroy the country.
Okay, sadly, gentlemen, we've run out of time. Thanks to our guests in Sana'a, Hakim al-Masmari there, in London, Justin Crump, and in Cairo, Gregory Johnson. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome your comments and your suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team here, goodbye for now.